Thank you, Soledad, for joining us today at the Real College California Basic Needs Summit.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're thrilled to have you here. We have over 500 people with us this morning, all who are passionate about serving the students in our California community colleges who are striving for better futures through education. So let's start with your own journey. What first attracted you to journalism?
Really, it was that I wasn't particularly good at pre-med. I was pre-med in college, and my sister was as well, and now she's a surgeon. But I remember one day she said to me, you know, I was good at memorizing things, and I could kind of regurgitate things. And she said, you know, why do you have to memorize this? Like, you should understand, like, if you want to be a scientist, if you want to be a doctor, you know, you should understand these concepts, not just be good at being able to, you know, stuck them into your head for the, you know, before the test, and then regurgitate them for the, you know, for the exam, and then forget them afterwards. And it was a really good conversation about, you know, what are you really passionate about? Like, what do you want to do? Because you can do this fine, but you don't seem to really want to understand it. You want to be able to do well on the test. And I was always a pretty good student, so I could always do pretty well on the test. And I was like, I think you're right. I'm actually not passionate about it. And that was something for me, because I'd spent, you know, I'd been a candy striper. I worked in a pharmacy. Everything I had done had been toward medical school. And then all of a sudden it was like, I think maybe I'm not passionate about it. So I left school. I was a junior, and I started working at a TV station, and I loved it. I mean, I was fetching coffee and removing staples from the wall, running errands, you know, doing all the stuff you do at an entry-level job in TV. But I really loved just being around the business. And I think that's when I figured out, you know, two things. One, it's really important to understand what you love to do, but it's also equally important to understand what you're not passionate about, and make that decision pretty early about there's a million other things to do. If you're picking your life's work, you should want to be passionate about it.
That's so true. And, you know, we have students here today as well, and they're all struggling with, am I picking the right path for myself? If I, you know, what happens if I change? And so do you have any advice for them since you made those changes yourself?
Yes, I do. It's a lifelong struggle. I wish I could say, listen, by the time you get to 28, you'll be done. It's not. Life goes like this, because every option is, you know, well, here's the next job, but do I want to do this or do I want to do this? And here's the next thing. Do I want to do this and do I want to do that? And I think it's also a process of understanding yourself. Like, what do you really want to do? And that just takes time. So I've always looked at opportunities as being additive to my resume. Never take something that's going to take you a step away. Never take a job that is something you loathe doing. I mean, obviously we all take jobs because we need the money, we got to do a thing, but for the most part, career-wise thinking. I just wouldn't suffer in a career. I would try, in fact, to figure out, you know, within that career, what do I like about it? Sometimes the answer is, ugh, I really thought I'd love being a lawyer. I hate being a lawyer. But what I like to do is deal with people and do this. Okay, that's good information. And that takes you a new direction of, okay, you know, interesting to understand. In fact, for me, for pre-med, it was exactly that. It was like what I thought I would be doing, which was working with people and patients. Well, sure, down the road, you know, really doctors are researchers and they're really scientists. And I like the people part and the scientist part less. And so once I realized I liked the people part, it's like, oh, okay, well, there's a whole world of other opportunities that involve the people part. Let me go explore some of those and see what I might be good at.
So transitioning from journalism, and now you're making films along with your reporting. So how did this come about?
I got a lot of opportunities, first at CNN, and then first at NBC, and then at CNN, to create content, to do films. I mean, you know, they were sort of like long projects for TV news. But then, you know, I think we found that docuseries became very important and became very popular and did very well, especially those that were really based in news and undergirded by content and data and facts, and then had an interesting story kind of laid on top. And so what I really, for me, it was just an extension of the news. I like the idea of just reporting, but just kind of a different format. You know, you could do a 1-minute piece, which is what we did at NBC News, or you could do a 4-minute piece, which was more of a piece for CNN, or you could do, you know, an 11 hours of anchoring, which we also did at CNN, or you could do a 6-part docuseries, which we also did kind of everywhere. And they're all news in some capacity. They're all reporting. They're all journalism. They're just different shapes of it. And so I never really saw it as very different. It was just a new little arm of what I could try to do and what I already liked to do.
So all of your films focus on important social issues. So what is the mission of your production company, and what kind of films do you like to make?
Yeah, our mission of our production company is to really take a look at stories that fly under the radar. And unfortunately, a lot of stories that focus on social justice or just people that often many don't think their stories matter or that they're important. Those are the stories that I like to tell. I like stories where I'm not bumping into a whole heck of a lot of people on that story with me. And so we found that because you're telling a story about social justice, it usually involves great characters. It involves interesting history that's usually not understood or frequently not really known about very well. It involves often, legal drama. It involves opportunities and rights and striving and everything that makes a good story. So for me, that was what was really compelling about it. That, you could serve a purpose and feel like your work had a lot of meaning in addition to, just filling that hour and doing that story. And I think that was just personally important to me. I just liked the idea that my stories had meaning and that I was serving a purpose in my work.
Well, I'd like to play for our audience a brief excerpt from your film, Hungry to Learn. So many of the professionals who are here today, this is their life's work as well in helping to create affordable options for our students. So we're going to transition for a few minutes to a brief excerpt, and then we'll be right back with more questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
More than 600 colleges and universities now do have food pantries. However, food pantries have never solved hunger, and they have never prevented it from occurring in the first place. People go to food pantries when things have already fallen apart. So the challenge is to try to address the underlying problems in the first place.
In the 50s and 60s, people who went to college went because they had resources. You were more likely to come from a two-parent family, they might have some savings, and those were the kinds of people who got the access to college. Many people who didn't have money had no way of really affording it, and also people were not encouraged to go to college in the same way. So if you came out of high school, it was more common, especially if you were a woman or a person of color, to be encouraged to just go to work. Both the federal government and state governments took steps to try to broaden and open those doors. They did things like create a federal financial aid system. They also put some resources into public colleges and universities to expand the number of seats and places that were available to people nearby their homes.
We worked really hard to expand opportunity for higher education. But every time a door opens a little bit wider, we find some other way to try to make sure that not everybody gets through.
Your budget calls for cuts in education. You're calling for cuts in student aid.
You don't bat 1,000% in making sure that everyone is deserving. We find students that are getting this aid, really there's no reason or excuse for them to be getting federal help.
We have watched funding for higher education diminish as the student body has become slightly browner and more women finish college. And now we say, maybe we sent too many people, we're spending too much money.
Since 2008, state funding for higher ed has dropped by 50%.
As states have cut funding to those places, they in turn have raised their tuition, passing the bill on to families.
We'll put a chart up that basically shows the rate at which inflation has increased over the last 10, 15 years and the rate at which higher education costs have increased. This is not sustainable.
Students today want a decent job that's there for them. They want stability. The only way to get there is with a college degree. And it's not necessarily a bachelor's degree. I mean, a lot of the people that I'm talking about that are going through this, they're pursuing a certificate or an associate degree. You can't be an electrician or fix a car anymore without a college degree of some type.
We have a problem where people are being priced out of college, and in their effort to not be priced out, they're taking on debt that they're gonna have real trouble repaying.
The average student graduates with about $37,000 in student debt.
So we have about a 50% dropout rate on average. People over 4, 5, 6 years are not finishing degrees. Because people can't fully pay the price of college, they have a very strong likelihood of ending up with nothing, except debt.
Soledad, now I will take the opportunity to ask you questions specifically pertaining to Hungry to Learn, to the film and your inspiration and contribution to society by focusing on such a crucial social justice matter, a right for people, basic need that many are lacking, but yet it's a right. So what inspired you to create this documentary?
I think what first happened was my producer and I had a mutual friend who was telling us about that she had discovered that students were actually living in the journalism office. As you guys know, on campus, it's just a little small space where the students could do some work for the newspaper. And I think one day she discovered at her college that the students were living there, that the students had no place to live. And it kind of opened her eyes to wow, this is really incredible. So we started researching that story. We came across Sarah Goldrick-Robb and her work and her research. And what I found so fascinating was that, like Sarah said, at first it seems as if it's a sad story of just a handful of students. Just something's gone horribly awry. And then you start looking at the data and you realize that actually this is a systemic problem, that these numbers are real numbers, that they are large numbers. And that means that there's just this massive problem that has to be dealt with, that has to be understood and confronted. And so I think for us, we decided to do a project. We fundraised for it. We were able to track down students who would talk to us. That was really hard because, as I'm sure you guys are well aware, for a lot of students, there's a lot of shame and a lot of embarrassment. So we'd meet them, they were wonderful, and then they'd ghost us, and then they'd never call us back, or they'd start and they'd drop out. And so that was really challenging, trying to get a number of students, a critical mass of students to take part. But eventually we ended up with 4 really wonderful students who we were able to, chronicle their lives. That's the hard part. You gotta open up your entire life story if someone's doing a documentary on you. And I think the thing that was interesting for me was to see how they, over time, really became activists. I think as we were shooting and the more they talked about it, and the more they thought about it, and the more they were interviewed about it, they began to realize, this is unfair, that it's not just me, right? They'd start with, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed, and then all of a sudden they'd realize oh, it's not me, it's not I, this is a problem, and how do we solve this problem? And I think they really saw themselves very differently. They saw themselves as activists who were helping to bring attention to a problem and helping really maybe try to fix that problem in a meaningful way.
I want to once again express sincere gratitude because you were able to bring light to a major problem with grace, even though it's such a challenge for the students, and reducing stigma. And as community colleges, the best way to connect with our students and to acknowledge that it is fine that they're experiencing these major challenges is by reducing stigma correlated to their challenges. The next question that I have for you is, when you were in college, were you aware of these challenges? Were you aware if any of your peers were experiencing hunger and housing insecurity?
I wasn't really aware. Certainly not hunger. When I went to college, everybody had to be on the meal plan. And so there were no swipes. There was no, it was just part of your room and board. So anybody who was living on campus, everyone in the house ate at the same times. So, each house had a cafeteria essentially, and regardless of whether you had $5, in your pocket or $100 in your pocket, you could have as much food as you want. It was very different than the way it is today. My daughters are college age, and so I've spent a lot of time, touring colleges, looking at colleges, and it's just very different. And there wasn't even this sense of like, over here is the panini bar, and over here is the burrito bar, and over here is the pizza area. We just had the lunch ladies, and you had to be very nice to them, and they'd put food on your plate. And you got what you got. Maybe if you weren't happy with any of the choices, there was a salad bar. So it's very different today. I think when I was a senior, it began to dawn on me, and I was doing a lot of work on campus, working on my papers and working on the thesis, stuff like that. You begin to realize, like, oh, some of these students aren't going home. Now, I lived in New York, and I went to school in Massachusetts, so it was a very easy ride. But it never had dawned on me that there were just some students who would not go home for the holiday. For example, a lot of students who lived in the South, in Mississippi, just didn't have the funds even to take a Greyhound bus, down home for Thanksgiving and Christmas and back. And I think that was when it started dawning on me, not so much about food insecurity, but much more about this idea that there are people who are at a very expensive college who really were hanging on by a thread financially.
We're going to pause the interview for a moment to introduce our audience to one of the students in your film, Eve Brescia, who describes how expensive college food is and how challenging it is just to eat.
I applied for financial aid. I obviously get money, but I don't have a meal plan and I couldn't afford it all. My PB&J sandwich. My first year here, I would forget to eat because I was so busy. There's been times where I'm like, I don't have any food because I forgot to pack a lunch. I'm like, crap, like I need to get something. And like they'll have like $6, $7 sandwiches and I'm like, I can't make that happen. Even like their chips are like $2 or $3. I have anxiety too, so I have had like a couple mental breakdowns, just like thinking about how much college is overall and how much I'm gonna be paying back. I feel like going to college is for people who do have money. And the people who don't have money, they can go to college, but they have to suffer throughout the entire experience because they're constantly just trying to make ends meet. And that I just don't understand.
So how did you find the 4 students? You mentioned briefly that it was difficult. How did you specifically identify Joey, Shakira, Eve, and Izzy?
We literally hung out at the food banks and we'd talk to people and just say, here's what we're doing, working on a project, we'd like to talk to you. And that gave us an opportunity to kind of pre-interview them, right, to chat them up and see. And we had so many students who were fantastic to talk to. But again, I think it meant they understood what doing a documentary meant. They understood not just the time commitment, but also just that it's opening up your life, and so eventually the 4 all agreed, and we were really lucky. We had been given marching orders. We were funded by ConAgra and W.R. Grace Foundation, and I think what was interesting to me was we had been given marching orders. The only orders, generally when you do a doc, you don't take a lot of feedback from people. The overwhelming funding came from ConAgra Foundation. And the only thing they said was, make sure it's diverse. We want to make sure that all students can see themselves in the student group population. We don't want it to feel like it's just one subset and everybody can say, oh, so it's about Latino students, or oh, so it's about boys, or oh, so it's just about, this. And I thought that was a really fantastic advice. And I thought it was a great marching order. And I'm not sure if I hadn't been told that, I'm not sure, I might have found one great student and then done that doc on one student. So I really appreciated ultimately that they gave us fantastic advice about how to really make it a great project.
So how do you correlate the fundamental right of having access to food as we're seeing our country go through civil unrest, and that as we're striving as the California community college system to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion? How is this correlated to equity from your stance? Access to food, access to secure living, safety?
I think ultimately it's a question, I'd almost pull out the lens a little wider and say, what do we want America to look like? I think a lot of these issues that we're seeing in social unrest and political unrest and kind of an upheaval that we've seen for a while has been a sense of like, what does this country look like, and who is served by it? Is it only a certain people? Is it only certain kinds of people get housing and certain kinds of people get food, and other people, well, just too bad, you just weren't born into the right family? And I think that all of these things, a lot of the social unrest is that, right? It's, what do we want America to be? Do we want it to be fair for people? What should policing look like? What should college look like? What does fairness even mean to people? And so I think clearly education fits into that, but education where students are actually teed up to be successful in education. I mean, we would all, if we were talking about first graders, right, we would think it's insane to expect that a first grader can go through a school day without eating. We're not talking about first graders, but for many people, they go from first grade to college and no one has really stepped in and made the financial situation in their families better. So they get taken off that meal plan that they might get in elementary school and middle school and high school. And now they're in college and they have to be taken care of as well. Often they have jobs actually, and they're juggling a lot, but it's really, really hard, and college is very expensive in many cases. So, I think it's exactly part of the equity conversation, but the equity conversation is part of the, what does America look like, and how does America work for people, for everybody?
Thank you. We grapple with that every single day. We're committed to serve as best as we can. Students continue coming back to our institutions in spite of this pandemic, as challenging as it is, to learn mostly virtually, because they have not lost hope of what education can bring to their lives, the opportunities. And for many, we know that once they achieve their goals, not only are they impacted, their families, their future generations will be.
Community, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think these kids themselves, certainly the 4 that we profiled, are very inspirational, right? Like, with all the obstacles you see that they have, there they are the next day getting out of bed and going to class. It's so remarkable. I wish students like that, because I think all of these students don't see themselves exactly as the heroes that they are, right? I think they are a little shell-shocked. I think they've got some PTSD from it. I don't think they say, holy cow, I'm amazing. If I could get through that, I'm incredible. I think it wears them down a lot. They say that in the documentary, just how exhausting it is to live day to day to day, trying to figure out when you're going to eat. So I'm so proud of them and so inspired by them and just so amazed by them. I hope that everybody sees them really as the heroes that they are.
So what was the most intriguing thing you learned from covering the college hungry crisis or hunger crisis?
Yeah, a couple of things, I think, right? I think what Real College is doing is amazing, and I hadn't heard of it before then. And to watch it grow and to really see how hands-on, people who are all coming together, but each in their own little worlds, do so much for students was remarkable. I think it just to see the care, and it's exhausting, right? I mean, it's really hands-on care, was incredible. And it makes you feel like it's in good hands, that there's some very good, competent leadership. I think Sarah's work, where she's really gathering data to make sure that all these decisions are undergirded by really good research. And then, of course, the students themselves, that they're not anomalies, right? Again, it's not the sad story of 4 students who. This is a story of the American college student today, for a host of reasons. And so I think that's probably the thing that stood out. It is not the sad story of a handful of students who are just in these dire circumstances. It's a lot of students who are taking on a lot of debt and trying to navigate their futures and their lives, and they need some help.
Definitely stories of resilience, right? And hope. And it also reminds us as community college leaders and employees that we have a major responsibility. So, do you know where they're at the 4 students? What are they doing?
I do, sort of. Eve graduated, and she is, and she's doing really well. She wants to be an actor, which is a tough gig, but she got through, and I think she ended up leaving the project in the middle, but we reconnected at a screening, and it was so great to see her again because she kind of ghosted me in the middle. And she said, my phone was shut off. I just didn't have access. Shaquara and Eve are both, Shaquara finished, she went down to Florida to have her baby, who's the absolutely most adorable thing ever. He's just the cutest, cute as a button. And Eve is still in school. And our final, he's just great. He's going into the military, and it was his dream. And I think he was nervous about whether or not that dream would come true because he had a lot riding on it, and it has so far, knock on wood. So they're all doing really well, and I think they are clearly very resilient, and I think they're moving through to make sure that they're trying to be able to change the situation that they had. I don't think they want any other student to have to deal with it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It is great to know that they're doing well, that they've set their own goals and that they're accomplishing them. We know you've definitely made a major impact in their life.
I'm not sure about that. I think what I got to do was to take their stories, gather them together, twist them and braid them into a documentary, and then present them to people. I think that these are students, we just tell the story of the work that they're doing and their commitment and their resilience and their amazingness. And I'm just honored that I got a chance to be able to be that person who tells their story.
Thank you. I will end with one last question. And if there's anything else you'd like to add, that would be wonderful. Do you feel that you accomplish your own personal goals with this film? And maybe before recording it, you weren't certain what they were, but was there an impact that was made that now continues to drive what you do today?
Yeah, I think so. One, I learned a lot myself. I think I would have been a person who had said, wow, food pantries, that's amazing, that's so great. And now I say, food pantries are great, but, right? I think everybody who works at a food pantry would be really excited if there came a day where they didn't have to have that job anymore, right? If someone said, guess what? The great news is we don't need the food pantry. Everyone would be like, amazing. Yes, I'm happy to be worked out of this job. So that was a big shift for me. Food pantries are not a solution. They're a short-term solution, but I think there really is a need for a systemic solution, right? That's bigger than, sort of bailing students out. My goals are always to just educate and illuminate and give the mic to people who I think are often ignored or their stories aren't told. So we definitely accomplished that goal. And then I think one thing that's really nice when you get a documentary sponsored, you can give it away, right? You can say, take it. Everyone should take it and share it and really show the humanity of these students that you might not necessarily know. If you're lucky and you have parents who are working and can pay for you to go to college and maybe food's never been an issue in your family, then that's great. But here's an opportunity to get to know students. That's what we try to do for all of our projects. Just humanize people that you might not know and explain their circumstances and hand them the mic so they can really do the talking. And I think we were able to do that in this project.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Do you have any final recommendations? There are over 500 attendees today. Do you have any final recommendations for the attendees that are here? We have students, we have presidents, we have administrators, directors, student services assistants, different classifications. They're here because they care. They want to make a difference for these students. What is your recommendation to them?
Yeah, I think two that you certainly can see in the documentary. Number one is your work matters, right? You see when the advisor is really walking Shaquara through how to graduate, right? Like that work matters. That person got Shaquara from here to here. Her work, her investment of time, and it was a lot, made a huge difference. So if you ever have that momentary wondering of like, oh, this is so hard, does it even matter? It does matter. It matters a lot. That would be my first thing. And then secondly, I think I would steal what I think Real College does well, which is convene and talk about the issue. You know, until we really sort of have these conversations and the issue is elevated and talked about, and it becomes normalized in the conversation to have this discussion, I think it'll always be a bit of a sidebar issue. And I really appreciate that Real College does a lot to say, you know, we're going to bring people together, come up with short-term solutions, longer-term strategies, policies that connect with them, things that we're learning, talk about research, plan out research, and then really just grow bigger. So, you know, the convening process, I think, is a very important one as well.
Thank you.
You bet.
Well, Soledad, we're so grateful to you for joining us today. And I want to add what Martha has already said, that, you know, you've given voice to these young students and treated this topic with dignity. You know, one of the things that we struggle with at our colleges is taking that stigma away, so students don't feel that they are being that they're lesser because they don't have the funds to stay in college and reach their dreams, but also that to educate our community around us. And so a film like this really goes such a long way in being able to legitimize and humanize, as you said, our students. So thank you for doing that. We have one last question, which is, what is your next project?
Isn't that a little bit like asking someone who just delivered a baby? So, cute baby, when are you having the next one?
Well, but do you have an answer?
We do. You know, we have a lot of projects going at all times. So right now we're in the middle of a multi-part series that looks at environmental racism that I'm hoping to get on the air by February. We're looking at why so many young women of color who go missing are often not searched for, both by the police and by the media. And we do a multi-part series for HBO working on that. And then we got a bunch of other projects in production. We just finished a documentary that looks at Seattle's outbreak of coronavirus, where they were really the first in the US. So yeah, it never ends. We're popping out babies all the time, I guess I would say. But always trying to figure out how do we tell those stories around issues that I think are really important, that I know are important in terms of social justice, that just deserve to get more attention.
And I know I said that was my last question, but since you mentioned the pandemic, are you, you know, we were working on this challenge well before the pandemic hit. And of course, the pandemic has only increased the challenges that our students are facing with food and housing insecurity. Are you seeing any trends or any data that you're looking at that showing what this post-COVID world might be looking like for students? Is it going to create more challenges? You know, we're all struggling with those questions of how we're going to handle all of this.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that enough data is in and enough time has passed, because I think a lot of these students are in the middle of it. So it's sort of, you know, watching people really doggy paddle, trying to keep their head above water. We don't really have a solution yet to what's happening with COVID-19. I think we are looking around the corner saying, oh, you know, conversations about a vaccine, that feels like good news pretty close on the horizon, but not here yet at this moment. So yeah, our students, you know, all the students that we deal with, and the students, I have a small foundation, we send girls to college, you know, they're all struggling. It's like anything, right? It just makes a very difficult, untenable situation all that more difficult, because these students are already on the margins, already on the edge, already hanging by a thread. For example, if you use a food bank, but your college now isn't in session, usually that food bank doesn't really exist anymore for you. You know, because no one's on campus. That's been a real issue for some of our students. And just, you know, how do you upgrade of technology when you weren't planning to do it? And where do you live if your school shuts down? You know, I mean, so there's just a lot of issues. And I think these students who are already struggling with basic needs, you know, they're hit the hardest, of course.
You're totally right. Well, thank you again. We are so grateful for your time today and your willingness to use your influence to be a social justice warrior by sharing the stories of those who have gone unheard. It is our great honor and pleasure to have had you with us today. You've inspired us, and we can't wait to see what comes next. Thank you so much.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you for having me. I totally, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to everybody.
Thank you.
You bet.